Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the program. Today we're going to visit Gobekli Tepe, revisit the Vulture Stone, and I've talked Gobekli Tepe a few times already, and basically discussing the layout, the historical context, that it was buried 12,000 some odd years ago, and there are some speculations involved with the astronomical alignments of the place and the translations of it. Well, it seems like someone has done that legwork now, and they've officially translated it, and it just confirms a lot of what was talked about in the past. I forget where this article, I think it's Live Science, I'm not sure. But it reads, ancient carvings show evidence of a comet swarm hitting Earth around 13,000 years ago. As you guys may know, the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis states that there was some sort of comet impact that hit the Earth around 13,000 years ago that brought us out of the last ice age and into the Holocene era, which is what we're in now, or the Holocene epoch. And there were a few findings that were bringing this to light and confirming a lot of the quote speculation and a lot of the hypotheses surrounding this event, like the Greenland comet, the Hiawatha impact crater, rather, near Greenland, that was dated to around the time of the Younger Dryas. And now we have this translation, and among other things too, like the black mat layer, the platinum anomalies found in North America and Greenland, and all of these other things as well. So anyway, researchers have translated famous ancient symbols in a temple in Turkey, telling of a devastating comet impact 13,000 years ago. The carvings could describe a comet impact that occurred around 10,950 BC, about the same time a mini ice age started that changed civilization forever. So, yeah, the mini ice age is the Younger Dryas, and it's sandwiched between two of these spiking events. So there's this thing called the Greenland ice cores that I think it was a Swedish group or some Nordic group of people. This research team, they drilled into Greenland and they pulled out this core, and then they could basically track what the weather was more or less like, kind of like a historical timeline, like a natural historical timeline. And they found around the Younger Dryas period there was two spikes in temperature, and in between those spikes was like it got super cold. So there's this period, if you guys know about climatology and stuff, there's this period called the Balling-Allerod period, which is like this warming period. It was steadily warming. We were steadily coming out of that last ice age, but it was interrupted by these comet impacts. So we were having this steady increase, then we had this huge spike in heat, and then we got sent back down to the temperatures got sent back down to ice age levels, kind of like a nuclear fallout situation. And then there was also a flood and all that stuff. Anyway, so this is a period of 1,000 years. Around that time, agriculture and the first Neolithic civilizations arose. So that's a weird parallel, right? And I've talked about the rise of agriculture and the rise of these civilizations in very recent videos. And so we have this weird situation that we have, this very unique situation where there's catastrophe, and then there's recovery in a sense, in terms of society and humans and civilizations and stuff like that. So the comet strike is one of the leading hypotheses. Scientists weren't able to find physical proof until the Hiawatha impact crater and stuff like that. That's the closest we have. And then we have these translations, these carvings, the Vulture Stone. Martin Sweatman, he's a researcher of this, and he says, along with the recent findings of a widespread platinum anomaly, which I mentioned earlier, it virtually seals the case in favor of a Younger Dryas impact comet. There's just so much evidence piled up now that it's hard to argue against. It's past that tipping point now, because for a long time the biggest criticism was, well, there's no smoking gun. Well, I think now it's up to the critics to poke good and effective and logical holes into the hypothesis, which has not been done. To my knowledge, it hasn't been done. Our work serves to reinforce that physical evidence. What is happening here is the process of a paradigm change, and that's something you hear a lot. The historical paradigm is changing, where the way the academics are going to look at at this episode in history is going to change, and it's going to affect everything else thereafter. That's what they mean by paradigm change. The translation of the symbols also suggests that Gobekli Tepe wasn't just another temple, as long assumed. It might have also been an ancient observatory. So this was one of the hypotheses that not just me, but a lot of people were talking about, that there's this correlation, kind of like the Orion correlation with the Giza complex. So, oh, by the way, let me just show you some pictures really quick before we move on. So here's a picture of the geographic location of Gobekli Tepe. If you guys aren't aware, so this is Turkey. It's in the south eastern part of Turkey, or the northwestern part of Mesopotamia. And here's just a bigger scope here. So here's Iraq, and then here's the Euphrates. It's between the Euphrates and the Tigris, just in the way northwestern part of it. So again, there's this whole entire area is ancient. Mount Ararat's here. Catalhuyuk is further to the west. Babylon is in the southeast of Mesopotamia. So there's a lot of ancient history that we know of that's already going on here. So the fact that Gobekli Tepe exists should not be a big surprise, considering where it is geographically. And then these are the enclosures, A, B, C, and D. This is E and F. This is what's been unearthed. Over like 70 or something crazy, like 80% of Gobekli Tepe is not even above ground yet. They know through ground penetrating radar that there's more that they've yet to excavate, but they haven't yet. If you guys see enclosure D, this is where the Vulture Stone is, pillar 43, enclosure D. Very famous. What they've, or this researcher rather, has claimed to translate is this Vulture Stone. And as far as the correlation goes, here's a pretty good map. So if you see the ground plan on Gobekli Tepe, it corresponds to these star clusters. The pillars of Gobekli Tepe mark the stars of Cancer. The figure was drawn as a man's head and torso, presumably around 74 BC. I don't know if that date's right. It might be older than that. When Cancer marked the vernal equinox. So all these alignments they check out. And that's basically what they've been studying, and that's why they think it was an ancient observatory, because there was such a focus on the stars that they had to have some sort of esoteric knowledge about the sky. Or it might have even been, it might not have been esoteric, it might have just been common knowledge among that civilization. Kind of like how we all know about NASA. None of us, the great majority of us aren't members of NASA, but we know that NASA exists. We know that they study space, and they're part of space exploration and technology and all that stuff. So it might have been something like that. The translation of the symbols also suggests that it wasn't just another temple, it was an observatory for monitoring the night sky. One of its pillars seems to have served as a memorial to this devastating event. That's the Vulture Stone. And it has a picture of like a beheaded man, which a lot of scholars interpret as the end of a certain part of civilization. And I say certain part because there were still hunter-gatherers who were all throughout the world, just like they are today, and they were always like that. They were always in that state. It was the offshoot of humanity that was an advanced civilization, like Atlantis or whatever you want to call it. They're the ones who got their symbolically, their head decapitated. Gobekli Tepe is thought to have been built around 9000 BC. But the symbols on the pillar date the event to around 2,000 years before that. So that's another weird thing about when you talk about Gobekli Tepe. They've only dated what the sediment of what it was buried in, because they found that it was deliberately buried, and they know that it was deliberately buried is because the fill or whatever it is that they used to bury it was completely different from the ground, the actual the ground that it was sitting on. So we have these two different stratas, but they're not really stratas because one is naturally there and the other was placed on top, presumably by man. So yeah, so these pillars are talking about something that happened 2,000 years before this tentative date we gave it, which is the Younger Dryas. And here's the Vulture Stone. Just really quick, I'm not going to give a full analysis, but there are some symbols here. So at the top, we see these man bag things that we've seen, like Oannes and Quetzalcoatl and all these different civilizing figures carry in their hands. So we have this. We don't even know what that is. It might be full. it might represent knowledge. It might represent a seeds or like a repository of something. Who knows? Or tools. This is a vulture on the left, and this is the sun in the middle, and it seems to be holding the sun in its hand or its wing or whatever. And here's another vulture type of animal. And on the top right, I think those are some type of planet. I can't tell. And then on the bottom is a scorpion. And so basically all these symbols correspond to the things in the sky. And it's telling a story. That's the bottom line here. And it's telling a story of a cataclysm at a certain point in time, which is, again, 13,000 years ago. So Sweatman and his team of engineers discovered they actually corresponded to astronomical constellations, showed a swarm of comet fragments hitting the Earth, and that could be Comet Encke, which is this big comet that entered our solar system about 30,000 years ago. So this big comet, it broke into fragments, and some of the fragments every so often, like clockwork, it collides with the Earth essentially. And there are different meteor streams that are associated with this big comet, like the Taurid meteor stream. I think the Perseids as well. There are different meteor streams that we pass through, kind of like crossing, like traffic, crossing a highway, so to speak. Like the Earth is just crossing this path of all this debris. And the Tunguska event also was a part of one of the smaller fragments that hit the Earth as well. You guys can look that up if you guys don't know about it. It's still, to this day, it's barren. You can't build. Nothing's growing there. The headless man symbolized a human disaster and extensive loss of life. Indicates that the event they described might have had long-lasting impacts on civilization. Yeah, that's if you get your head cut off, that has long-lasting impacts on you. So that's apt symbology there. The carvings show signs of being cared for by the people of Gobekli Tepe for millennia. So this place is, not only is it the oldest temple that we know of, it was probably way older than the date indicates, just because it seems like it's such a complex site that there must have been a tradition of taking care of it for a long time, and it's not like a one-off situation. To try to figure out whether that comet strike actually happened or not, the researchers used computer models to match the patterns of the stars detailed on the Vulture Stone to a specific date, and they found evidence that the event in question would have occurred about 10,950 BC, give or take 250 years. So they started creating these algorithms and these models to just to help match the stars to its appropriate time, and then they looked it up, and it corresponds to this date. So now we're starting to have this parallel evidence starting to overlap with each other. And this is a screenshot of the computer program that they have. So this is what it would have looked like 10,950 BC on, I think, the vernal equinox. Yeah. And it says San Liurfa, but that's, if you look at the map, it's right next to Gobekli Tepe, so the vantage point still would have been largely the same. And then, yeah, the dating of these matches the ice core from Greenland that I talked about earlier, and the Greenland ice cores say the Younger Dryas period begins around 10,890, around there. So again, we have this overlapping of dates. Many Paleolithic cave paintings and artifacts with similar symbols and other repeated symbols suggest astronomy could be very ancient indeed. So I've done a lot of episodes on cave paintings and stuff. They're way older than all the stuff I'm talking about now. And they talk about very similar things. Instead, they have more animal symbols as well, like really interesting stuff like megafauna that don't even exist anymore, extinct animals that were being very intricately drawn. So the guy goes on and says, if you consider that according to astronomers, this giant comet probably arrived in the inner solar system 2030. I just talked about that, the Comet Encke thing, 30,000 years ago. It entered our solar system, and where it came from, they think it came from this thing called the Oort cloud, which is way, way beyond the Kuiper belt, and it's just super far away. And for some reason, I don't know, I can't even conceive of a way how we could know that it came into our solar system, but it did not that long ago, 30,000 years ago. It's really, in the grand scope of things, of course, it's very, very young. It's not that, it's a very short time. And Very visible and dominant feature of the night sky. So when they saw this, it would have been undeniable. Like, it was right there. Like, have you guys seen that Simpsons episode where they thought they were all of Springfield was in panic because there was a comet, there was an asteroid coming, and they could see it coming, and then it ended up burning in the atmosphere, and there was nothing. It was like the size of a Chihuahua head. If you guys, maybe my older audience remembers that episode, it was probably something like that, where at night you could see this ball of fire coming at you. And if that's the case, then it totally makes sense that they would have had sculptures or reliefs and carvings about it. So yeah, it's really, really interesting stuff. And another thing that the article didn't talk about or briefly covered was the platinum anomaly. And so I'll link this into the description as well. Basically, they documented a discovery of a distinct platinum anomaly spread all across the North America, dating to the Younger Dryas onset. And then there's also this thing called the black mat layer here. This is at the Clovis site in New Mexico. And this black mat layer is associated with that comet impact. Basically, all the coal and all the burnt shit that just got destroyed at the time eventually became a strata in the earth and is now known as a black mat layer. And wherever you find this, that probably means that area was affected by this comet impact. Anyway, let me know what you guys think about this. I think it's a really interesting, it's a very interesting line of inquiry that they've looked into, and there's so much literature on it now that if you guys are just hearing about this, I would highly recommend you guys go and spend some time, read about it, look it up, and you'll learn a lot of things along the way, like things that you probably wouldn't expect, like astronomy, even astrology, history, civilizations. You just start going into this rabbit hole, but these rabbit holes, it's not just one rabbit hole, they branch off into a bunch of different things. And then you start learning about culture and all of these different stuff, geology, erosion. So there's a lot of stuff going on here, and it could be very, very complicated if you are just trying to delve into everything at once. But but after looking through a lot of this stuff, I feel like it makes a lot of sense, and it's a good base to have when you look at history from that point onward. And it kind of puts into perspective why humans did the way, basically why history unfolded the way it did. And also you start to have, or I started to have a better, not just an understanding of their decision making, but also my awareness was high that history is written by the victors, and there's probably a lot of stuff left out. So you start to learn by omission, sort of. You kind of develop that sense. Anyway, I think I've talked too long. Let me know what you guys think, and I'll probably have another video for you guys tomorrow.